Welcome to Celtic Tomes, bringing you readings from bygone books.
Welcome to Celtic Tomes, bringing you readings by Gary and Ruth from the classic books of Celtic lore and study. Book 1, Chapter 5 of British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions.
Chapter 5, Changelings, including the Plentyn Newid, the cruel creed of ignorance regarding changelings, modes of ridding the house of the fairy child, the legend of the frugal meal, legend of the place of strife, Dewi Dal and the fairies, prevention of fairy kidnapping, fairies caught in the act by mothers, and piety as an exorcism. Section 1. The Tylwyth Teg have a fatal admiration for lovely children, hence the abundant folklore concerning infants who have been stolen from their cradles, and the Plentyn Newid, change child, the equivalent of our changeling, left in its place by the Tylwyth Teg. The Plentyn Newid had the exact appearance of the stolen infant at first, but its aspect speedily alters. It grows ugly of face, shrivelled of form, ill-tempered, wailing, and generally frightful. It bites and strikes, and becomes a terror to the poor mother. Sometimes it is idiotic, but again it has supernatural cunning, not only impossible in a mortal babe, but not even appertaining to the oldest heads on other than fairy shoulders. The veracious Prophet Jones testifies to a case where he himself saw the Plentyn Newid, an idiot left in the stead of a son of Edmund John William of the Church Valley, Monmouthshire. Says Jones, "I saw him myself. There was something diabolical in his aspect, but especially in his motions. He made very disagreeable screaming sounds, which used to frighten strangers greatly, but otherwise he was harmless. He was of a dark, tawny complexion. He lived longer than such children usually lived in Wales in that day, a not altogether pleasant intimation regarding the hard lot to which such children were subjected by their unwilling parents, reaching the age of 10 or 12 years. But the creed of ignorance everywhere, as regards changelings, is a very cruel one, and reminds us of the tests of the witchcraft trials. Under the pretence of proving whether the objectionable baby is a changeling or not, it is held on a shovel over the fire, or it is bathed in the solution of the foxglove, which kills it. A case where this test was applied is said to have actually occurred in Carnarvonshire in 1857. That there is nothing specially Welsh in this needs not to be pointed out. Apart from the fact that infanticide, like murder, is of no country, similar practices as to changelings have prevailed in most European lands, either to test the child's uncanny quality, or, that being admitted, to drive it away, and thus compel the fairies to restore the missing infant. In Denmark, the mother heats the oven and places the changeling on the peel, pretending to put it in, or whips it severely with a rod, or throws it into the water. In Sweden they employ similar methods. In Ireland the hot shovel is used. With regard to a changeling, which Martin Luther tells of in his Colloquia Mensalia, the great reformer declared to the Prince of Anhalt that if he were prince of that country, he would venture homicidium thereon, and would throw it into the river Moldau. He admonished the people to pray devoutly to God to take away the devil, which was done accordingly, and the second year after, the changeling died. It is hardly probable that the child was very well fed during the 2 years that this pious process was going on. Its starved, ravenous appetite, indeed, is indicated in Luther's description. It would eat as much as 2 threshers, and would laugh and be joyful when any evil happened in the house, but would cry and be very sad when all went well. Section 2. A story told in various forms in Wales preserves a tradition of an exceedingly frugal meal which was employed as a means of banishing a plentyn newid. Monsieur Villemarquet, when in Glamorganshire, heard this story, which he found to be precisely the same as a Breton legend, in which the changeling utters a rhymed triad as follows. Gweles viken, gwelet yerwen, gwelet mesken, gwelet gwezen, gwelet meza, gwelis gwial, gweles derven hekot brezal, bisquas nawelis kemendal. In the Glamorgan story, the changeling was heard muttering to himself in a cracked voice, I have seen the acorn before I saw the oak. I have seen the egg before I saw the white hen. I've never seen the like of this. Monsieur Villemarquet found it remarkable that these words form in Welsh a rhymed triad, nearly the same as the Breton ballad, thus. Gweles misken gwelet derven, gweles viken gwelet yarwen, erio no weles evelhen. Whence he concluded that the story and the rhyme are older than the 7th century, the epoch of the separation of the Britons of Wales and Armorica. And this is the story. A mother whose child had been stolen and a changeling left in its place was advised by the Virgin Mary to prepare a meal for 10 farm servants in an eggshell, which would make the changeling speak. This she did, and the changeling asked what she was about. She told him, whereupon he exclaimed, Meal for 10, dear mother, in one eggshell? And then he uttered the exclamation given above, I have seen the acorn, etc. And the mother replied, You have seen too many things, my son. You shall have a beating. And with this she fell to beating him. The child fell to bawling, and the fairy came and took him away, leaving the stolen child sleeping sweetly in the cradle. It awoke and said, Ah, mother, I have been a long time asleep. Section 3. I have encountered this tale frequently among the Welsh, and it always keeps in the main the likeness of Monsieur Villemarquet's story. The following is a nearly literal version, as related in Radnorshire, an adjoining county to Montgomeryshire, and which, like most of these tales, is characterised by the non-primitive tendency to give names of localities. In the parish of Trefegloes, near Llanidloes, in the county of Montgomery, there is a little shepherd's cot that is commonly called the place of strife, on account of the extraordinary strife that has been there. The inhabitants of the cottage were a man and his wife, and they had borne to them twins, whom the woman nursed with great care and tenderness. Some months after, indispensable business called the wife to the house of one of her nearest neighbours, and yet notwithstanding that she had not far to go, she did not like to leave the children by themselves in their cradle, even for a minute, as her house was solitary, and there were many tales of goblins, or the Tylwyth Teg, haunting the neighbourhood. However, she went, and returned as soon as she could. But on her way back she was not a little terrified at seeing, though it was midday, some of the old elves of the Blue Petticoat. She hastened home in great apprehension, but all was as she had left it, so that her mind was greatly relieved. But after some time had passed by, the good people began to wonder that the twins did not grow at all, but still continued little dwarfs. The man would have it that they were not his children. The woman said they must be their children, and about this arose the great strife between them that gave name to the place. One evening, when the woman was very heavy of heart, she determined to go and consult a conjurer, feeling assured that everything was known to him. Now there was to be a harvest soon of the rye and oats, so the wise man said to her, When you are preparing dinner for the reapers, empty the shell of a hen's egg, and boil the shell full of pottage. Take it out through the door as if you meant it for a dinner to the reapers, and then listen to what the twins will say. If you hear the children speaking things above the understanding of children, return into the house, take them, and throw them into the waves of Llyneba, which is very near to you. but if you don't hear anything remarkable, do them no injury." And when the day of the reaping came, the woman did as her adviser had recommended to her. And as she went outside the door to listen, she heard one of the children say to the other, "Gwelais fesan cyn gweled derwen, gwelais o'i cyn gweled iar. Oed ni welais ferwi bwydi fedl, mewn plisgyn wiar." Acorns before oak I knew, an egg before a hen. Never one hen's eggshell stew enough for harvest men. On this, the mother returned to her house and took the 2 children and threw them into the llyn. And suddenly the goblins in their blue trousers came to save the dwarves, and the mother had her own children back again. And thus the strife between her and her husband ended. Section 4. This class of story is not always confined to the case of the Plentyn Newid, as I've said. It's applied to the household fairy, when the latter, as in the following instance, appears to have brought a number of extremely noisy friends and acquaintances to share his shelter. Dewi Dal was a farmer whose house was overrun with fairies, so that he could not sleep of nights for the noise they made. Dewi consulted a wise man of Taiyar, who entrusted Dewi's wife to do certain things, which she did carefully, as follows. It was the commencement of oat harvest, when Kai Mawr, or the big field, which it took 15 men to mow in a day, was ripe for the harvesters. "I will prepare food for the 15 men who are going to mow Cowmire tomorrow," said Eirwacht, the wife, aloud. "Yes, do," replied Dewi, also aloud, so the fairies might hear. "And see that the food is substantial and sufficient for the hard work before them." Said Eirwacht, "The 15 men shall have no reason to complain upon that score. They shall be fed according to our means." And then when evening was come, Eirwacht prepared food for the harvester's sustenance upon the following day. Having procured a sparrow, she trussed it like a fowl, and roasted it by the kitchen fire. She then placed some salt in a nutshell, and set the sparrow and the salt with a small piece of bread upon the table, ready for the 15 men's support while mowing Kai Mawr. So when the fairies beheld the scanty provision made for so many men, they said, "Let us quickly depart from this place, for alas, the means of our host are exhausted. Who before this was ever so reduced in circumstances as to serve up a sparrow for a day's food of 15 men?" So they departed upon that very night, and Dewi Dal and his family lived ever afterwards in comfort and peace. Section 5. The Welsh fairies have several times been detected in the act of carrying off a child, and in these cases, if the mother has been sufficiently energetic in her objections, they have been forced to abandon their purpose. Dazzy Walter, the wife of Abel Walter of Ebwy Fawr, one night in her husband's absence, awoke in her bed and found her baby was not at her side. In great fright she sought for it, and caught it with her hands upon the boards above the bed, which was as far as the fairies had succeeded in carrying it. And Janet Francis, of that same valley of Ebwy Fawr, one night in bed felt her infant son being taken from her arms, whereupon she screamed and hung on, and as she phrased it, "God and me were too hard for them." This son subsequently grew up and became a famous preacher of the gospel. There are special exorcisms and preventative measures to interfere with the fairies in their quest of infants. The most significant of these, throughout Cambria, is a general habit of piety. Any pious exclamation has value as an exorcism, but it will not serve as a preventative. To this end you must put a knife in the child's cradle when you leave it alone, or you must lay a pair of tongs across the cradle. But the best preventative is baptism. It is usually the unbaptized infant that is stolen. So in Friesland, Germany, it is considered a protection against the fairies who deal in changelings to lay a Bible under the child's pillow. In Thuringia, it is deemed an infallible preventative to hang the father's breeches against the wall. Anything more trivial than this, as a matter for the consideration of grave and scholarly men, one could hardly imagine. But it is in precisely these trivial or seemingly trivial details that the student of comparative folklore finds his most extraordinary indices, Such a superstition in isolation would suggest nothing, but it's found again in Scotland and other countries, including China, where a pair of trousers of the child's father are put on the frame of the bedstead in such a way that the waist shall hang downward or be lower than the legs. On the trousers is stuck a piece of red paper, having 4 words written upon it, intimating that all unfavourable influences are to go into the trousers instead of afflicting the babe.
That was Book 1, Chapter 6 of British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions by Wirt Sykes. Gary and I would like to send out a huge shout of thanks to Dom Duff, the Breton power folk musician, for his help with the Breton pronunciation in this episode.
You can find out more about Dom on his website at www.domduff.com. That's www.domduff.com. The link will also be in the show notes.
Thanks so much, Dom.
Thank you.
A link to the full text can be found in the show notes at celtictomes.libsyn.com. That's LIBSYN.com. You can also find all of the names, place names, and other non-English words written down for you in the show notes in the order in which they appear in this reading. If you'd like to comment on this chapter, pop over to our show notes and join in or start a conversation. If you've enjoyed this podcast, why not try our sister podcast, The Celtic Myth Pod Show, which brings the stories of ancient Celts to life with narrative and drama, as well as bringing you modern Celtic music, stories and information. Find The Celtic Myth Pod Show in all the places where the best podcasts hang out, or on our website at celticmythpodshow.com. You've been listening to Celtic Tomes, read by Gary and Ruth. Our theme music is Gander in the Pretty Hole by Slauncher, and a link to their music can be found in the show notes at celtictomes.libsyn.com. This podcast has been produced by The Celtic Myth Show.